The 2024 presidential election is shaping up to be one of the most intense and divisive our country has faced.
This is all election hunting, election interfering. It's going after Joe Biden's political opponent because he can't do it himself. There is no crime.
Former President Donald Trump is one day closer to finding out if he will be the first convicted felon with a chance at the Oval Office, while President Biden is facing down Democrats and progressives fighting to rally his voter base as polls continue to show Americans are ditching the president over his support of Israel and his handling of the economy. But both candidates are unleashing attacks on one another, hoping that with strong enough language, they can get their number one point across. Vote for me.
Why isn't Joe Biden here speaking to you tonight? You know why? Why isn't he? Because he can't put two sentences together. That's why he's not here.
Donald Trump still thinks windmills cause cancer. That's what he said. By the way, remember when he was trying to deal with COVID, he said, just inject a little bleach in your veins. He missed it, all went to his hair.
Well, it's not only the presidency that's up for grabs. Both houses of Congress are on the brink of flipping. With open seats and political infighting, it's unclear who will win control in November. Here to go on the record is Scott Tranter, Director of Data Science for Decision Desk HQ. Scott, so good to see you as always. It's been a game of tag between Trump and Biden in the polls. Earlier this month, Biden edged out Trump, but Decision Desk HQ shows Trump has taken a leap ahead of Biden, now leading him by 1%. Is Trump's trial, the hush money trial that's been taking place in New York City, having an effect on voters?
Look, at best, it's having no effect if you're the Biden campaign, because obviously he's rising and it's all over the news. But most likely because it's all over the news, because he's on camera, he's talking about it. It's even when he's not talking about it, the news coverage is there. It looks like it's having no negative effect on him. In fact, we've seen even poll numbers rise among non-likely voters, which, again, we don't necessarily track those folks a lot, but we're looking towards a high turnout race this fall, and those voters are trending towards Trump, and so that's something we're going to be watching, especially as this trial unfolds, and that's a big dynamic.
So President Trump is still rallying around this idea of not accepting the election results, painting a picture of fraud and corruption. He's swayed GOP lawmakers, or many of them, to his side, with many unwilling to say that they will accept the outcome in November. Scott, will Trump supporters rally around that sentiment at the ballot box in November?
Look, he's certainly using it as a rallying cry. Look, in 2020, there's no significant or any irregularities that were going to overturn the result. I don't expect that to be the case this cycle as well. But it's very motivating for his base. There's a core of the Republican electorate, 10-20% of them, that believe this is a problem, believe that what he says on this matter, and it's certainly a rallying cry for his campaign.
Yeah, and Republicans using the language election integrity, to make that case. So we'll watch that language and watch for any development. So, Scott, last weekend here in D.C., both Donald Trump and RFK Jr. made their pitches to the Libertarian Party convention. Trump was booed while RFK received a slightly warmer welcome. The party ultimately nominated Chase Oliver, but does this throw a wrench in RFK's plans? I mean, I think he was hoping to have more sway with the Libertarians.
Yeah, I think he was too. I would imagine they kind of knew, both Trump and the RFK campaign knew a little bit what they were walking into in terms of a libertarian convention. This is something that not a lot of people watch, but it's something I watch as well. I wasn't expecting either of them to come out, unscathed. RFK wasn't, for the insiders, wasn't expected to win. I know he was talking about it. It certainly helped with ballot access and things like that. But largely, the Libertarian Party doesn't look at these two candidates as true, purebred libertarians.
So RFK Jr. is still very much looking to collect signatures to get on the ballot in as many states as possible. But he's been talking quite a bit about getting on the debate stage in Atlanta in the end of June at the CNN debate. How likely will it be that RFK makes it onto that debate stage and the other debate in September?
Well, it looks like, and again, these getting on the CNN debate, it's rather arbitrary. CNN could wake up tomorrow and change their debate rules. It's not like they're in some sort of commission or there's some sort of law about that. And the RFK campaign's pointing that out. Based on CNN's own rules, it appears that he's probably going to make it on the polling side, and he's certainly going to make the argument that he has enough signatures to reach the electoral threshold. The problem is he may claim he has enough signatures, but a lot of these states don't have to announce whether he made the ballot until later this summer after the debate. So there's going to be some back and forth, and there's going to be some claiming of, hey, he made the threshold, and CNN's probably going to say he didn't. We'll see how it plays out, but he's certainly got a case, at least on the polling side.
Yeah, and you make a good point. There's no commission on presidential debates here. So we're in a scenario between the networks and the campaigns. So we'll be watching that. Moving to the Senate and just up the road in Maryland, here from Washington, D.C., Larry Hogan, the former governor of that state, is out with a new ad touting his abortion rights stance. Now, this isn't something we hear from a lot of former Republican governors or Republicans in general. So, Scott, where does this leave Democrats like his opponent, Angela Brooks, who are looking to attack him?
Look, he's coming out strong. He was, when he was governor of Maryland, he was, as he likes to say, states' rights. This is what the people want when it comes to abortion rights and things like that, which still isn't great. He didn't have the best ratings from Planned Parenthood and some of the more fervent abortion rights groups, but he's coming out strong, going against one of his weaknesses and seeing if he can't get a little bit of messaging share early before Brooks has a chance to raise some money and really hammer him on the issue, as I expect she will.
Yeah, and we've actually already seen her make that attack against Hogan. So I'm curious to see what her response is to this ad. Scott, very exciting news from the Decision Desk HQ, Nexstar, the Hill world today. Decision Desk is rolling out a new forecasting tool this week. What can we expect to see?
Well, thanks. Yeah, we launched it this morning. It's a forecast model. We are forecasting and doing analysis on all the states for the presidential, all of the Senate races, all the House races. So there's a prediction and analysis for each and every one. If you go over to thehill.com election center, you'll be able to see it. I think the headline today is, as of today, it's a slight favorite for Donald Trump to win the presidency. It's a pretty heavy favorite for the Republicans to win the Senate and a slight favorite for the Republicans to win the House. If we look at the presidential side, Donald Trump, at least in the model, is ahead in places like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, a little bit behind in places like Michigan, and fighting it out in Nevada and Arizona. This is taking into account all about 200 different variables. We look at FEC data, we look at polling, we look at fundamentals, voter registration, past trends, and we put it in there into a whole simulation and simulate it out. And it is very close to the presidential. I expect this to swing back and forth as we get more polling and more data. But right now, Donald Trump's the favorite, and the GOP is the favorite to take out the Senate and the House.
So, Scott, I want to get into, I guess, the nuts and bolts of how the forecasting tool works. How is it different from other models and from what other models are showing?
Yeah, so look, our model, we've been doing this since 2018. We have our code and our methodology peer reviewed by the Harvard Data Science Review. We put a lot of it out there. If you want to go to sleep tonight, definitely read the methodology page. You can tinker with it. But by and large, we stand by our methodology and the data inputs we put in there. It moves quite a bit based on FEC and polling data, which those are constantly updated, but it is also grounded in fundamentals. We look at voter registration at the district or the race level. We look at income. We look at ethnicity, gender, past voting patterns, new registrations. All these different demographic variables make up and determine what some of these outputs are. The other thing that we're pretty integrated is this polling average we've done with the Hill since for this past cycle. That has been finely tuned. We collect all the polls. We're not picky about it. We put every poll in there, whether we think it leans Republican or Democrat. Again, we want to look at the whole field and balance it out. But by and large, the way our model works is we want to take all the data out there and filter it through and make sure we get a good prediction. How it differs from others, there's some other famous ones out there from 538 and some school ones. Again, I think ours is pretty good in the sense that it's been academically peer reviewed. My guess is we're probably going to be a little bit more responsive. Our model is going to be more responsive to things like polling, just because that is more our style. We want to make sure we incorporate that in there. But I expect other models out there to be relatively in line, although I could see where some other models might have Biden leading. Will be interesting to see what that entails, because you could certainly make that argument depending on how you structure your model. But by and large, ours is based on the polling, based on some of these demographic pieces, and it's our fifth cycle doing it, so we're pretty good at cooking it out.
Scott Tranter, as always, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Donald Trump has said he will likely wait to announce his vice presidential pick until the start of the Republican National Convention, July 15th. But who's the frontrunner? Staff writer Rafael Bernal takes an in-depth look at the roster of Republican names being tossed around as Trump's potential number 2.
The cast of characters for the 2024 election is almost set. It's missing just one key player, former President Trump's running mate. Only Trump knows who he will pick, but his choice could steer the campaign and a potential second term in very different directions. Now, there's plenty of precedent for Veep picks that have propped up or dragged down their running mates, and there's some who have just quietly faded into the background. Let's get one idea out of the way quickly: balancing the ticket. Traditionally, that's a big consideration. It could be argued former Vice President Pence balanced Trump's ticket in 2016, but it would be surprising for Trump to run this year with a non-MAGA Republican. Still, ticket balancing sometimes works. Former President Kennedy made the right choice when he picked Lyndon Johnson as his running mate in 1960. Michael Dukakis didn't have the same luck with Lloyd Bentsen in 1984. Trump's obvious ticket balancer would be his own former UN ambassador and primary rival, Nikki Haley. A Haley pick would also reflect another rationale behind Kennedy's 1960 choice, picking the runner-up from the primaries. But contradicting Trump and running against Trump are likely not the keys to his political heart. There's another tried and true strategy: get someone who didn't do that well in the primaries. A Trump pick on those grounds could be businessman Vivek Ramaswamy, who's one of several Republicans throwing their hat into the Veep stakes ring. Ramaswamy would also fulfill another historical VP strategy: the young running mate to represent the future of the party. That worked out well for Eisenhower and Nixon in 1952, not so well for John McCain and Sarah Palin in 2008. Nixon, incidentally, had a dog-related scandal that threatened his place on Eisenhower's ticket. He was accused of corruption for accepting Checkers, a Cocker Spaniel potentially violating campaign finance rules. South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem would likely be on Trump's list were it not for her own doggy scandal. The difference there is that Nixon got out of it saying Checkers was part of the family, and Noem, well, let's not get into that. Picking a party elder or policy expert, another tried and true strategy, is also a mixed bag. Senator Marco Rubio could fit that bill, but would he be a Dick Cheney to Trump's George W. Bush, or again, a Lloyd Bentsen to Trump's Dukakis? There's one relatively new consideration that hopefuls like Rubio, Senator Tim Scott, Representative Byron Donalds, or even Haley could fill: race and gender diversity. Since World War II, Vice President Harris has been the only VP nominee of color, and the fourth woman on a major party ticket, though the only woman on a winning ticket. Overall, major party nominees of color are 3 for 3 on general election wins. There's Harris, there's former President Obama, and former Vice President Charles Curtis, a member of the Kaw Nation of Oklahoma, who served 8 years under Herbert Hoover. Democrats are likely to put more emphasis on diversity itself, but Trump will likely take Black and Latino voters into consideration when making his pick. Ultimately, Trump can be expected to pick a running mate based on personal taste and loyalty. Now, there's no accounting for taste, but there are plenty of Republicans bending over backwards to prove their loyalty to Trump.
May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and while mental health issues have become a more open conversation in the last decade, they still often take a backseat to physical health. That's especially true when it comes to pregnant and new mothers. And with all eyes on the baby, it's easy to miss if a mom is struggling. The National Alliance on Mental Illness estimates 1 out of every 5 women have been affected by anxiety or depression while pregnant or postpartum, but only about 10% of pregnant women will seek treatment. For the baby, this could mean premature birth, issues with sleeping and feeding, and even cognitive deficits. But for moms, it can increase the risk of substance abuse and even suicide. The Hill recently hosted a very important event, Moms Matter, closing the maternal mental health gap, where we spoke with moms who had been personally impacted by these struggles. Let's take a look.
My sister died by maternal suicide. Had we known the signs and symptoms and the risk factors, and she had the right help at the right time, I really feel like she would still be here with us today.
Struggling as a mom has been normalized. Instead of integrating social supports and making things a little bit easier, we say, it's hard, you'll deal with it and get over it.
I think there is a lot of stigma, but I think more importantly, there is not a whole lot of care. I think it's something that is medicalized. I think it's something that leaves women on their own without the support system.
I think the biggest stigma is that, that they're a bad mom. I wish moms knew that by getting help, you are a wonderful mom.
Joining us now from the Maternal Mental Health Leadership Alliance, Adrienne Griffin, and from Postpartum Support Virginia, Kamisha Battle Jackson. Adrienne and Kamisha, thank you so much for joining us today. Adrienne, I want to start with you. As we said, in our introduction, 1 in 5 women experience some sort of mental illness during or after their pregnancy. Why is the rate of treatment so low? Do you think this is medical mistreatment or medical distress, or really the stigma surrounding mental health?
Well, that's a really great question. And as you might imagine, the answer is multifactorial and complicated. Some women may not realize that something is wrong, especially if it's your first pregnancy. You might just think that being exhausted and overwhelmed is what it's like to be a new mother, not necessarily knowing that perhaps you're experiencing depression as well. Some women don't know how to reach out for help. It's really challenging to say as a new mother or as during pregnancy, if this has been a pregnancy that was hoped for, that, hey, I'm not doing very well. And there are providers who don't know what to do. And so I think it's a combination of many factors.
Kamisha, you went through some of this as a mother yourself. Talk about what it looks like and what pregnant and new moms and their support systems should really look out for.
Sure, yes. So the thing that's really important is that depression and anxiety look different for everyone. I know for me, it was rage. I remember crying every day for the first 3 months of my son's life. I remember feeling and looking just out of it. Just going through the motions, right? Diaper change, feed, sleep. Diaper change, feed, sleep, and not really enjoying it. And this new life that I created. I remember feeling like, oh no, what have we done? Because my life just changed. It just shifted. And it was no longer my life. It was like, I'm doing this thing and I'm caring for someone else. And who am I and where do I fit in this? And so I know that the baby blues is a term that gets kind of put out there. But if it lasts longer than that first 2 weeks, then you really want to say something as a mommy, as a new mommy, second time around, as a pregnant person. If you're feeling just like you can't connect to your pregnancy, or you feel like you can't really enjoy your pregnancy because maybe you're sick or you're having complications or what have you, I would say speak up and say something for sure.
So Adrienne, we talked with, Kamisha brought this up, speaking up, letting your, feelings, opinions, your gut instinct be heard. But what's the best way moms and their allies, because, their partners are also going through this maybe in a different way, but they're still going through it. How can they advocate for themselves and hold healthcare workers accountable?
Yeah, that's a great question. In an ideal setting, our healthcare system would be talking about mental health conditions from the moment a woman is pregnant, right? And say, hey, anxiety and depression are the most common complications of pregnancy and childbirth. We're going to check in with you every time we see you. We know that pregnant and postpartum people are actively engaged in the healthcare system. They see their provider once a month, then once every 2 weeks, then once a week, and then the baby is born, and then you see the pediatrician once a week, then once every 2 weeks, and every month, right? So there's ample opportunity for our healthcare providers to talk about mental health. And I would just suggest that if your healthcare provider doesn't bring it up, that you as the pregnant person or the new parent could say, hey, I've heard this. I just watched this production by The Hill, and I've heard that mental health conditions are very common. Let's talk about it. And I just want to echo something that Kamisha said earlier. It's not just postpartum depression. That's the term that we hear most often. Postpartum meaning after the baby is born, and depression, obviously sadness. But the majority of cases of postpartum depression actually start during pregnancy. And so that's why it's super important that obstetric providers are on top of this from the beginning. And in many cases, it's anxiety and not depression. And so it's a much broader spectrum of issues. And so what we just say to new parents, to pregnant and postpartum parents, if you're not feeling like yourself, if you're like, what's going on here, then go ahead and ask for help, reach out to help. And there's lots of resources that are available.
So we've started this discussion talking about new moms and their partners in general, but quite frankly, this issue disproportionately affects moms of color. March of Dimes advocate Stacey Brayboy had this to say on the stigma that Black women face at the Hills event earlier this month. Let's take a listen to that.
The stigmas that face the African American woman in the community, they truly do exist. How do I get help? Where do I go? Many times it's because you're not educated on where to turn to, or you don't feel comfortable talking to your provider.
Kamisha, as a Black mother, did you experience that stigma? And I have to say, I brought up that you were pregnant during the height of the pandemic, but we remember in 2020, the US and much of the world had this reckoning on race that really impacted how so many of us view race, in our culture, in society, in healthcare, mental health care. So what was your experience during that time? And what has your experience been like going forward?
Oh, sure. Thank you for asking that and bringing that to light. The one thing that I like that Ms. Brayboy mentioned is the stigma, and that our experience, it can be different. The one thing that I've experienced in talking to providers is I've come well informed. So to be clear, I'm educated. I have 2 degrees. I'm married. I have come from a history of strong Black women. And so when I came to my visits, I came informed, right? And a lot of times it was met almost with resistance. Like, well, how'd you know that? Or where'd you get that from? And so I just want to say to other mamas, it's okay to do your research and come to the visits with questions, right? And I also want to say that there's this stigma in the Black community, especially for women, that we have to be strong all the time. And I myself, I even present as this strong, and I am this strong woman that just doesn't struggle with depression, right? I'm not sad. I'm very bubbly and I'm excitable, and I laugh a lot and I laugh very loudly. But that was something to pay attention to, because I was not myself, right? And while I faced several instances of adversity and I triumphed in the past, this one I really needed some help with.
Adrienne, I'm going to go to you on this last question. What's your advice for moms who are experiencing mental health issues, and what resources would you recommend them look at?
Right. So the first thing is that, again, this is very, very common. It is nothing to be ashamed of. I mean, I experienced postpartum depression almost 20 years ago when my son was born, and it really fundamentally rocked my world. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know where to reach out for help. We have so many more resources. We have this issue is being talked about so much more. Still not enough. And so again, if you're not feeling well, if you're not feeling like yourself, there are resources. And the first one is the National Maternal Mental Health Hotline. that has been in operation for over 2 years and has helped almost 35,000 families already. And that number is 1-833-TLC-MAMA. And it offers English, voice and text support in both English and Spanish. It's 24/7. And it's a great place to start. And those hotline counselors then can connect you with local resources like Postpartum Support Virginia, where Kamisha is in Virginia. And there are organizations like Postpartum Support Virginia now in existence in many of the states. And our website, Maternal Mental Health Leadership Alliance, also has lists of resources. And so there is help that is available. Start with your obstetric provider, your family practice provider, your pediatrician. Those folks should be able to point you in the right direction for getting help.
Well, Kamisha Battle Jackson and Adrienne Griffin, thank you so much for your time today. We don't talk about this issue enough, so I'm so glad that you both have offered your insight and your wisdom that our viewers can definitely check out. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
That's it for What's America Thinking. I'm Julia Manchester. Come back next week.